Hello, this is JAUNMKJ78 here, and I am going to do a video about basic airbrush maintenance and cleaning. So, I have two airbrushes here. One of them is a siphon fed, which is made with pache, and another one is a gravity fed, which I actually do not know who this is made by. But it is a actually very good airbrush. I do like it a lot. So, I'll go ahead and go over the siphon fed one by Pache first. So what a siphon fed means is that you have your paint cup on the side and you have your air that goes into there. And so when you, and these are both dual action. So dual action means you can control how much paint comes out. So when you push it down and bring it however far you want it to go, it'll force air through there, which will actually create paint to go up through that little paint area there. And so that's how this one works. And so basically the basic disassembly and cleaning of this type of airbrush is really rather simple, and also a lot of airbrushes that I've worked with are all pretty relative with your basic cleaning. One thing that I always do is every single time, no matter what I'm painting with or what, I always clean my airbrush after I'm done painting, because if you don't, you won't have really much of a good airbrush at all, and you'll just end up being frustrated about everything that involves painting of anything that you work with the airbrush. So generally the first thing that I do when I'm working on cleaning the airbrush is I'll take off the handle, which is in the back here, and then you see I have my needle screw, and my spring screw. Next thing I'm going to go ahead and take off is the front end, or the nozzle. And so on the nozzle, it actually has two pieces. I don't generally take those off when I'm doing a basic cleaning, just because there's not really a huge need for it. The next piece that I will take off is actually, I'm going to go ahead and unscrew the needle screw. And what that does is it'll take out the needle. And I actually just dropped part of my airbrush. So, here it is. So then the next piece, the piece that fell off, is actually a part that where the paint will sort of hang out and while it's being sprayed out, and it's also the place that concentrates the paint into a certain pattern that you want. So I'll go ahead and just pull that piece off, and I'm gonna go, take the cup off. That's generally that's always the first thing I do, just because it's common sense to take the cup off. So really, once I'm at this point, this is about as far as I go with disassembling it when I'm doing a basic cleaning. But if I really want to do a full, really nice, in-depth cleaning, which I recommend doing at least once a month, depending on how often you use your airbrush, I would definitely recommend just taking the whole thing apart and cleaning every single piece. So same basic thing for reassembly. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go just put my needle in first. And then that little piece that had fallen off earlier, I'm going to put that right there on top of the needle. And you can kind of see, if I push on that piece comes out. I want to have that touching the needle and pushed all the way back towards the airbrush itself. One really important thing to note is that the needles, you cannot bend them in any way, shape, or form, and you have to be very careful when putting any piece back over onto your airbrush, because if you bend it, when you're spraying, you're going to have a spray. This is like if you're spraying straight, you're going to end up having to spray this way or this way, depending on which way the needle is bent. So that's definitely something you don't want to have bent. Then you're going to want to go ahead and screw in your needle screw, put your handle back on, and put the cup back in, and you should have a brand clean airbrush. Some of the tools I use are actually, they're all actually really easy to find. Q-tips are really great for getting into medium-sized spaces to larger spaces. This is actually something I got from my dentist to clean my braces, which I got rid of a long time ago. And you can probably find these at Rite Aid. They're just little brushes that you clean in between braces or in between teeth or whatever they're used for. What I use on top of that is I will actually use actual airbrush cleaner. I cannot read who this is made by because it's really old. And I actually refilled this a bunch of times. This is actually rubbing alcohol that I use. Rubbing alcohol is definitely a great product to use when cleaning out your airbrush. So it really will just get rid of any bit of dirt and grime or any bit of paint and grime that's inside your airbrush. So that's sort of the basic assembly for the siphon fed. This is just the pache, but it is very similar on a lot of other airbrushes. So now for a gravity fed, a little bit different, but just about everything. Like the only difference is the cup, the paint cup, which is actually now at the top as opposed to being on the bottom like the siphon fed. The gravity fed, obviously, you take your cap off and you put your paint right inside there. So same basic thing. For this one, this actually has a adapter which I had purchased without the airbrush to go with my, it's a converter that goes from a Badger to a Pache. Badger is another type of airbrush company. So I'll just take that off. Next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is just take off my handle again. And take off the front. And now it's exposed the tip of the needle and the needle housing. So I'm going to go ahead and just unscrew the needle screw and take out the needle. Now with this needle, this is actually a way thinner needle. And what that's going to mean is with the thinner the needle, the slower the paint will come out. At least that's with my experience. I may be wrong, but that's my experience. So with slower paint, that means you're going to have, for me, more control. But at the same time, I'm so used to this particular one that has a bigger needle and it can spray more, that control really isn't a huge issue for me. But definitely for beginners, I would say getting an airbrush that spits out less paint in a single time, because when I first began airbrushing, I found myself just painting excessively and getting drips and globs. So for this particular one, this is about as far as I can go without using the tool that came with this airbrush. So the tool that came with this airbrush is this really little tiny wrench, and it goes for the little front end of your paint nozzle adapter thing. So this one is way small. It's a very small piece. And so essentially once you have that thing off, there's not really a huge need to take a bunch of other parts off, but for purposes of fully taking this one apart, this one's a little bit more complicated because there is a little silver piece that is right inside there. Whoops, right inside there. And that is actually a very hard piece to keep in the right spot. So I'm going to go ahead and take off the spring housing, or the spring screw, and there you have now the spring. I'm going to take out the spring, and with this airbrush I'm going to also take out the don't know what that's called. Bummer. So now all I have left is just my trigger and the spring, whatever it's called again. I also forgot. So I'm not going to play around with that because it's really quite hard to get back on. But one of the things just to do with it is to just fiddle around with it. Even if it takes you a long time, you have to be really patient with it, because the first time I took apart this airbrush, it took me quite a lot of time to really get used to having that new mechanism in it that I was not used to. So I'm going to go ahead and put this all back together, and really those are just the basics of doing airbrushes. So see you later.